What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another video. Later this month on October 31st, Riftbound League of Legends TCG is officially releasing globally, and I'm super hyped. So in today's video leading up to that release, I want to go over 3 traps you should avoid if you are new to Riftbound, learning Riftbound, or want to become competitive in Riftbound. These 3 traps are things you're going to want to avoid in your playtesting, things that a lot of players fall into commonly, and things that I want you to be aware of so you can get over those bad habits or just learn more about competitive Riftbound. So we're gonna get into it in today's video. However, I'm not going over every single comprehensive trap you might fall into playing Riftbound, because there are a lot of common TCG traps and then even more that specialize to Riftbound. So drop a comment down below if I don't talk about a trap that you are aware of that you want to make other players aware of as well. Let's turn this into a community tool that we can all share and discuss. With that being said, let's go into the 3 traps that I want you guys to avoid while you learn how to play Riftbound. So the first trap that I want to talk about avoiding is holding for no reason. So let's go to this example board state. Let's say that I'm playing the set deck. Let's say that I have a Pit Rookie and Treferian Glory Seeker that are going into my next turn, readying in my base. As an example, let's also just say my opponent has no board presence, no units in their base, just for the sake of the example. So on this turn, let's say I'm at 0 points, I would go with my Pit Rookie into the Navori Fighting Pit, and I would go with my Treferian Glory Seeker into this battlefield here, the Monastery of Hirana, and I would score 2 points. Awesome, fantastic. Now, where does the problem come in? Now, let's just say, again, our opponent's off to a slow start. They have no units to contest this. Let's also say they have no spells to contest this, and we go back into our next turn, and these units survive in this battlefield. We have held these battlefields, and we get 2 more points for free. That's awesome. Where is the problem? The problem is holding for no reason. So what I mean by holding for no reason is we can leave these units in this battlefield with the potential of holding for an additional turn. If we do that, we might get some big benefits. We might go to 6 points right away. However, we have to assume that our opponent has a couple of brain cells, and even though they might have bricked their first turn or 2, or for some reason couldn't answer these 2 units in this battlefield, we have to assume that by the 3rd or 4th turn, they're going to have something that can deal with the units in this battlefield. And you have to know when playing Riftbound that units are most vulnerable to spell removal, to death by battle, to death by unit abilities, even sometimes death by gear abilities. You have to know that units are most vulnerable to those types of things when they are left in battlefields. So obviously the first turn we throw this up here to score, we can't retreat. But if any or both of these units survive and hold, we have to know when we are continuing to hold for no reason. So in many cases, if these have both survived and held these battlefields, it may be the correct play to retreat both of these, because both these battlefields have been scored that turn because they both held. There's no reason to really keep these up here in a lot of cases. Now, I say a lot of cases because there are going to be key matchups and key moments where you do want to actually keep these up here, or different units. Again, these are just examples. You're going to come across thousands of different combinations of cards, combinations of board states where it's going to be correct or incorrect to hold or to retreat. But this is something that I want you to be thinking about when you're playing your games of Riftbound and just getting a feel for the competitive landscape. So at a baseline level, keeping these here just for the sake of holding is not automatically correct. However, let's talk about some situations where it could be correct to keep these up here and hold, even though they've already scored the battlefield this turn. When would we not really want to retreat these units? Some examples of matchups where you would actually not want to retreat these units are up against your opponents that are playing hold-based strategies. Hold-based strategies are decks like Master Yi, like Ahri, and like Teemo that want to get in control of a battlefield and actually maintain control of that battlefield throughout the game, because their strategy benefits from doing so. In the case of Master Yi, they benefit from holding battlefields because the leader gives them a might buff when you attack into them. So the longer they can hold, the longer they can fend you off in combat, and you have to rely on things like spell removal or unit ability removal to clear those units out. In the case of Ahri, it's a little bit similar, where Ahri can deal -1 might to any unit that attacks units that Ahri has in her controlled battlefields. And then in the case of Teemo, Teemo wants to get into battlefields in order to set up his various hidden traps that you'll have a hard time attacking into. So in those types of matchups, it may actually behoove you to keep your units here and try to hold into the following turn. Maybe not so much with little weenies like this, but if you do have, let's say, a set conqueror or set brawler up in one of the battlefields, it's a little bit bigger, a little bit more difficult for your opponent to actually get out of the battlefield, it may be a really good idea to keep it there instead of retreating it and then trying to swing back in the next turn. Because if your Teemo opponent, for example, gets a bunch of hidden cards set up in a battlefield, it may be really hard or even sometimes impossible for you to get that battlefield back under control. And then that obviously leads me to say, if you are playing a hold base strategy yourself, you probably don't want to retreat these units for the exact reasons that I mentioned, just that we're flipping the side of who the player playing the hold base strategy is. But now let's talk about scenarios where you would heavily want to consider retreating these units after they've held for an entire turn cycle. Once they've gotten their points worth out of here, what types of matchups are these going to be really vulnerable in, where you would be really advantageous to retreat these and protect them from any sort of like combat or in battlefield removal? Well, matchups like Kai'Sa that have a lot of spell removal, a lot of it that actually targets in battlefields. Yes, they have some that target in the base as well, but you're at least minimizing your chance of your units running into removal if you retreat them from the base. Not only does Kai'Sa have a lot of spell removal, but they also have big units like Thousand-Tailed Watcher that can easily beat over your units in battle. So in a case like that, it's very important to keep an eye on your opponent's rune count. That's sort of like a tip within a tip, so you know when your opponent may or may not be able to drop a bomb like Thousand-Tailed Watcher, or maybe like Tasty Fey Folk, or any of the other accelerate high cost cards that are in set 1 origins for Riftbound. Not only the Kai'Sa matchup, but you may also want to consider retreating your units when you're up against a set deck, because set plays this card called Set Brawler, which by spending a buff can shoot itself up to 8 might, which is probably going to clear out a good amount of things that you have in your battlefields. So again, learning the matchups, learning contextually when it makes sense to hold or to retreat. Remember, this tip is not holding for no reason. There are definitely going to be scenarios in which you want to hold. It's just a matter of learning what those matchups are and when to do it versus when to not do it. The next trap I want to talk about is avoiding playing more than one of your chosen champion when you don't have to. Again, this is going to be contextual. Some decks are going to want to play 3 copies of the chosen champion. Some decks really only need to play 1 of the chosen champion. So let's look at a few scenarios in which we might want to only play 1 or multiple copies of our chosen champion. Well, as a general rule, if your chosen champion is of a really high cost, like Master Yi Honed, you probably only want to play 1 copy of that chosen champion. Why is that? Well, having a really high cost unit in multiple copies in your deck is going to make the hand you draw a little bit more awkward, because generally you're going to be able to play more of your low cost units rather than your high cost units. So that's one reason. The second reason is you have access to that chosen champion at literally any point in the game that you need to or want to play the card, assuming you have the correct number of energy and power to do so. So why play multiple copies in your deck with a chance to draw them when you're basically starting out the game with 1 copy in your hand already? A couple more examples of when you'd only really want to play 1 chosen champion include if you're playing Teemo. Teemo can actually just constantly recycle the chosen champion he chooses to play, probably the purple Teemo, with the legend ability to constantly just add it back to your hand, which is a great combo for resetting it as a hidden card so that you can keep getting the +3 might every time you flip it. Another example would be in the case of a blue deck that is able to play Retreat. When you can retreat your chosen champion back to your hand, it's almost better than having another copy of it in your deck, because when you use the retreat to get out of dying to battle or dodge a spell removal ability, you're actually also accelerating your rune progression, which means you're going to have more runes to play with on your following turn. So that is a really smart tactic if you are playing a blue deck. And another scenario in which you might want to strongly consider only playing 1 of your chosen champion is in the case of something like Ahri Alluring, where it's pretty niche. It's not going to be useful in all situations, but at least you have access to the 1 of in any scenario where it might be good, like Ahri Alluring, where you know you can protect it rather well and you can get ahead on points and possibly win the game with it. But now let's talk about some scenarios where you may want to play multiple copies of your chosen champion, and let's go back to Kai'Sa as an example. Kai'Sa Survivor is probably one of the best cards in red, and it's relatively low costed. Being a 4 energy card means that you can drop this as early as turn 2, and coming out of the chosen champion area, that's obviously 100% consistent. However, because it is such a cheap costed card, you may find yourself wanting to play multiple throughout the game because the payoff on the card is just so huge. The accelerate allows you to potentially get extra draws as well as steal final points that you could use to win the game. Now, going back to the previous example of why you might only want to play one Kaisa Survivor, you are playing a blue deck with Kaisa that has access to retreat. So whether or not you wanted to play 3 copies of Kaisa Survivor because it's just so good, or you wanted to play 1 copy of Kaisa Survivor and maybe play 2 or 3 copies of retreat, I don't think you would be blamed either way. We've seen successful Kaisa lists playing anywhere from 1 to 3 copies of Kaisa Survivor and some number of retreat as well. And that just goes to show you that these are not hard and fast rules. These are just pitfalls and recommendations that I want to make to you guys as you learn Riftbound and start to play the game more and potentially get into it on a bit more of the competitive side with competitive gameplay and competitive deck building. Let's talk about our third pitfall, which is going to revolve around rune progression. Given this example, let's say we're playing set, let's say we're on our 3 rune turn and we're actually going into our next turn. If you didn't know, in Riftbound, you actually get 2 runes at the start of your turn. So let's say we flip a yellow and let's say we flip an orange. Let's also just say, for the sake of the example, the only 2 cards in our hand are Qiyana Victorious and Sabotage. Qiyana is a 4-cost unit with 1 power cost, really incredible card. Sabotage, also a fantastic card, 1 energy cost, 1 power cost. Saying these are the only 2 cards in our hand and 5 energy, a lot of players might immediately think, okay, let me just use all my runes, play Qiyana into my base, tap my 4, recycle 1 of my orange, and then just play the Sabotage, recycle an orange, look at my opponent's hand, get some knowledge, and then pass turn. But look what you just did there. You actually just set yourself back an entire turn. The reason is, like I said, every turn you get 2 runes, but on this previous turn, you just used 2 runes. So on the following turn, you're only going back up to 5 runes, not to 6 or 7. So in this specific scenario, again, there's going to be tons of different combinations of cards, tons of different combinations of plays and matchups, and all tons of things you're going to have to consider here. But I would say probably 9 times out of 10, maybe even more likely than that, it is going to be most correct to just play the Qiyana here, tap 4, recycle 1 orange, and even though you have 1 more energy to use, you probably don't want to use this Sabotage quite yet. You probably want to hold on to it, not set yourself back so far on power. This way, next turn, when all of your cards ready and you do actually get 2 new runes, you're actually increasing your rune count by a little bit, by at least 1. So now you can play bigger cards like maybe Carnivorous Snapvine, or you can play a smaller unit and then use the Sabotage to look at your opponent's hand, see what sort of interruption they might have, and then move the Qiyana into a battlefield to score that point safely and get a little bit of knowledge to know what they might have to come into this and attack this on the following turn. So there you have it, guys. Those are the 3 tips, tricks, and pitfalls I wanted to talk about in today's video. And as I mentioned before, there are tons of tips, tricks, and pitfalls that apply to TCGs and Riftbound specifically. So if I did not hit on one that you specifically really are knowledgeable in or enjoy, definitely let us know down in the comments. And also, the conversation from 50K Comics does not stop here, because we're doing 3 more traps I want you to avoid on our Tactor page. If you didn't know, Tactor is a website where we post free articles 3 times a week alongside our main channel videos. So if you go to the pinned comment of this video right now, you'll be able to read about 3 more pitfalls I want you to avoid as you learn Riftbound. If you did learn something new, definitely hit the like button and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next Riftbound video.